Good day, everyone. Welcome to today's lecture on purchasing and supply chain management. I hope you are all ready to explore how companies make critical decisions about what to buy, from whom to buy, and how to manage this relationship effectively. Let me start with a simple question. When you buy your favorite snacks from a local shop, have you ever wondered how that shop decided which brands to stock? The principles we will discuss today apply whether you are a small retailer choosing products or a major manufacturer selecting suppliers for critical components. Firstly, we will talk about purchasing. Purchasing, also called procurement, is the process by which companies acquire raw materials, components, products, services, or other resources from suppliers to execute their operations. Sourcing is the entire set of business processes required to purchase goods and services. For any supply chain function, the most significant decision is to whether to outsource the function or perform it in-house. Outsourcing results in the supply chain function being performed by a third party. Outsourcing is one of the most important issues facing a firm, and actions across industries tend to be varied. It's important to clarify the distinction between outsourcing and offshoring before we proceed. A firm offshores the supply chain function if it maintains ownership, but moves the production facility offshore. In contrast, a firm outsources if the firm hires an outside firm to perform an operation rather than executing the operation within the firm. In this chapter, our focus is on the issue of outsourcing rather than offshoring. We address the outsourcing of supply chain activities based on the following two questions. Firstly, will the third party increase the supply chain surplus relative to performing the activity in-house? And secondly, to what extent do risks grow upon outsourcing? Recall that the supply chain surplus is the difference between the value of a product for the customer and the total cost of all supply chain activities involved in bringing the product to the consumer. The supply chain surplus is the total size of the pie that all supply chain participants, including the customer, get to share. Our basic premise is that outsourcing makes sense if it increases the supply chain surplus without significantly affecting the risks. We go further and claim that a supply chain participant can survive in the long term only if its presence increases the supply chain surplus. One can then argue that each party's profit in a supply chain is correlated with the extent to which it increases the surplus. When designing a supply chain network, key factors include the locations of the supply chain sources, markets, and potential facilities, demand forecast, facility, labor, and material costs, transportation and inventory cost, product price across regions, taxes and tariffs, and desired response times and service levels. Supplier scoring and assessment is the process used to rate supplier performance. Suppliers should be compared based on their impact on the supply chain surplus and total costs. Unfortunately, sourcing decisions are often driven based solely on the price charged by a supplier. Many other supplier characteristics such as lead time, reliability, quality, and design capability can also affect the total cost of doing business with a supplier. A good supplier scoring and assessment process must identify and track performance along all dimensions that affect the total cost of using a supplier. Supplier selection uses the output from supplier scoring and assessment to identify the appropriate supplier or suppliers. A supply contract is then negotiated with the supplier. A good contract should account for all the factors that affect supply chain performance and should be designed to increase supply chain profits in a way that benefits both the supplier and the buyer. Design collaboration allows the supplier and the manufacturer to work together when designing components for the final product. Design collaboration also ensures that any design changes are communicated effectively to all parties involved with designing and manufacturing the product. Once the product has been designed, procurement is the process whereby the supplier sends the product in response to orders placed by the buyer. The goal of procurement is to enable orders to be placed and delivered on schedule at the lowest possible overall cost. Finally, the role of sourcing planning and analysis is to analyze spending across various suppliers and component categories to identify opportunities for decreasing the total cost. Cost of goods sold represents well over 50% of sales for major manufacturers. Within costs of goods sold, purchased parts are much higher fraction than they were several decades ago. This change has occurred because companies have reduced vertical integration and outsourced manufacture of many components. As there is greater pressure on firms to achieve lower costs and its supplier share of the cost of goods sold grows, good sourcing decisions will have greater impact on the cost leadership and competitive advantage enjoyed by a firm. Effective sourcing processes within a firm can improve profits for the firm and total supply chain surplus in a wide variety of ways. It is important that the drivers of improved profits be clearly identified when making sourcing decisions. Some of the benefits from effective sourcing decisions are the following. Better economies of scale can be achieved if orders within a firm are aggregated. More efficient procurement transactions can significantly reduce the overall cost of purchasing. This is most important for items for which a large number of low-value transactions occur. Design collaboration can result in products that are easier to manufacture and distribute, resulting in lower overall costs. This factor is most important for supplier products that contribute a significant amount to product cost and value. Good procurement processes can facilitate coordination within the supplier and improve forecasting and planning. Better coordination lowers inventories and improves the matching of supply and demand. Appropriate supply contracts can allow for the sharing of risks, resulting in higher profits for both the supplier and the buyer. Firms can achieve a lower purchase price by increasing competition through the use of auctions. When designing a sourcing strategy, it is important for a firm to be clear on the factors that have the greatest influence on performance and target improvement on those areas. For example, if most of the spending for a firm is on materials with only a few high-value transactions, improving the efficiency of procurement transactions will provide little value, whereas improving design collaboration and coordination with the supplier will provide significant value. In contrast, when sourcing items with many low-value transactions, increasing the efficiency of procurement transactions will be very valuable. In the next section, we discuss factors that influence the outsourcing decisions. The decision to outsource is based on the growth in supply chain surplus provided by the third party and increase in risk incurred by using a third party. A firm should consider outsourcing if the growth in surplus is large with a small increase in risk. Performing the function in-house is preferable if the growth in surplus is small or the increase in risk is large. How do third parties increase the supply chain surplus? Third parties increase the supply chain surplus if they either increase value for the customer or decrease the supply chain cost relative to a firm performing the task in-house. Third parties can increase the supply chain surplus effectively if they are able to aggregate supply chain assets or flows to a higher level than a firm itself. We discuss various mechanisms that third parties can use to grow the surplus. The first mechanism is capacity aggregation, which is a third party can increase the supply chain surplus by aggregating demand across multiple firms and gaining production economies of scale that no single firm can on its own. That is the most common reason for outsourcing production in a supply chain. For example, when Walton outsources certain component manufacturing to specialized suppliers, those suppliers can achieve economies of scale by serving multiple electronics manufacturers, reducing costs for everyone involved. Secondly, there is inventory aggregation mechanism. A third party can increase the supply chain surplus by aggregating inventories across a large number of customers. Next, there is transportation aggregation by storage intermediaries mechanism, where a third party that stores inventory can also increase the supply chain surplus by aggregating inbound and outbound transportation. Another mechanism is warehousing aggregation. A third party may increase the supply chain surplus by aggregating warehousing needs over several customers. The growth in this type of surplus is achieved in terms of lower real estate costs as well as lower processing costs within the warehouse. Savings through warehousing aggregation arise if a supplier's warehousing needs are small or if its needs fluctuate over the time. Procurement aggregation is another mechanism where a third party increases the supply chain surplus if it aggregates procurement for many small players and facilitates economies of scale in production and inbound transportation. Procurement aggregation is most effective across many small buyers. We also have information aggregation, and a third party may increase the surplus by aggregating information to a higher level than can be achieved by a firm performing the function in-house. All retailers aggregate information on products from many manufacturers in a single location. This information aggregation reduces search costs for customers. Receivables aggregation mechanisms suggest that a third party may increase the supply chain surplus if it can aggregate the receivables risk to a higher level than the firm or it has a lower collection cost than the firm. Another mechanism is relationship aggregation, and an intermediary can increase the supply chain surplus by decreasing the number of relationships required between multiple buyers and sellers. Without an intermediary, connecting 1,000 sellers to 1,000,000 buyers requires 1,000,000,000 relationships. The presence of an intermediary lowers the number of relationships required to just over 1,000,000. Finally, there is lower costs and higher quality mechanism. A third party can increase the supply chain surplus if it provides lower cost or higher quality relative to the firm. If these benefits come from specialization and learning, they are likely to be sustainable over a longer period of time. A specialized third party that is further along the learning curve for some supply chain activity is likely to maintain its advantage over the long term. A common scenario, however, is one in which the third party has a low-cost location that the firm does not. In such a situation, lower labor and overhead costs are temporarily reasons for outsourcing, because if the wage differential is persistent and the third party offers none of the other advantages discussed earlier, it is best for firm to maintain ownership and offshore production to the low-cost location. Firms must evaluate several risks when they move any function to a third party. The biggest problem arises when a firm outsources supply chain functions simply because it has lost control of the process. Introducing a third party into a broken supply chain process only makes it worse and harder to control. Therefore, the first step should be to get the process under control, then perform a cost-benefit analysis, and only after that decide on outsourcing. Another risk is underestimating the cost of coordination. A common mistake when outsourcing is underestimating the effort required to coordinate activities across multiple entities performing the supply chain tasks. This is specifically true if a firm plans to outsource specific supply chain functions to different third parties. Outsourcing functions to many third parties is feasible and can be very effective if the firm views being a coordinator as one of its core strengths. Firms may also face a loss of customer or supplier contact by introducing an intermediary. The loss of customer contact is particularly significant for firms that sell directly to consumers but decide to use a third party to either collect incoming orders or deliver outgoing products. Another important risk is the potential loss of internal capability and the growth in third-party power. A firm may choose to keep a supply chain function in-house if outsourcing will significantly increase the third party's power. For an example, companies such as HP and Motorola have moved most of their manufacturing to contract manufacturers but are reluctant to move either procurement or design, even though contract manufacturers have developed both capabilities. Given the commonality of components, a contract manufacturer can achieve a higher level of aggregation in procurement as well as design assets. Firms must also consider the risk of leakage of sensitive data and information. Using a third party requires sharing demand information and, in some cases, intellectual property. If the third party also serves as competitors, there is always a danger of leakage. Firms have often insisted on firewalls within the third party, but a firewall increases the specificity of asset, limiting the growth in surplus that the third party can provide. When leakage is an issue, especially regarding intellectual property, firms often choose to keep the function in-house. Finally, ineffective contracts pose a risk, as contracts with performance metrics that distort the third party's incentive often significantly reduce any gains from outsourcing. Traditionally, third-party logistics are focused on specific functions such as transportation, warehousing, and information technology within the supply chain. When comparing suppliers, many firms make the fundamental mistake of focusing only on the quoted price, ignoring the fact that suppliers may differ on their important dimensions that affect the total cost of using a supplier. For instance, suppliers have different replenishment lead times. Does it pay to select a more expensive supplier with a shorter lead time, or consider suppliers that have different on-time performance? Is the more reliable supplier worth the few extra pennies it charges per piece? In each of the aforementioned instances, the price charged by the supplier is only one of the many factors that affect the supply chain surplus. When scoring and assessing suppliers, the following factors other than quoted price must be considered: replenishment lead time, on-time performance, supply flexibility, delivery frequency and minimum lot size, supply quality, inbound transportation cost, pricing terms, information coordination capability, design collaboration capability, exchange rates, tax and duties, and supplier variability. Having multiple sources ensures a degree of competition and the possibility of a backup should a source fail to deliver. A good test of whether a firm has the right number of suppliers is to analyze what impact deleting or adding a supplier will have. Unless each supplier has somewhat different role, it is very likely that the supplier base is too large. In contrast, unless adding a supplier with a unique and valuable capability clearly adds to the total cost, the supply base may be too small. The selection of supplier is done by using a variety of mechanisms including online competitive bids, reverse auctions, or direct negotiations. No matter what mechanism is used, supplier selection should be based on the total cost of using a supplier and not just the purchase price. Now, we will talk about the auctions in supply chain. When outsourcing to a third party, firms have historically obtained competitive bids and in recent years have used reverse auctions on the internet. Competitive bids are a form of auction in which the bids are not revealed to other bidders. Commonly used mechanisms for these auctions are as follows. Sealed bid first price auctions require each potential supplier to submit a sealed bid for the contract by a specified time. These bids are then opened and the contract is assigned to the lowest bidder. In English auctions, the auctioneer starts with a price and suppliers can make bids as long as each successive bid is lower than the previous bid. The supplier with the last lowest bid receives the contract. The difference in this case is that all suppliers get to see the current lowest bid as the auction unfolds. In Dutch auctions, the auctioneer starts with a low price and then raises it slowly until one of the suppliers agrees to the contract at that point. In second price auctions, each potential supplier submits a bid. The contract is assigned to the lowest bidder but at the price quoted by the second lowest bidder. I hope you have enjoyed the video. We will talk about the basic principles of negotiations in the upcoming video. Thank you so much.